So the Niobrara River is actually 588 miles. 76 miles of it is designated as a scenic river, and we have over 200 waterfalls within that area. It's a very unique place. We're located just outside of Valentine, Nebraska, and you can see on this picture, the dark green area, that is what is the scenic river portion of this. It is beautiful. It takes 4 days to canoe from the beginning of the 76 miles to the end, and each day actually has a different focus and is very different, very unique. The first day, it's all about waterfalls. It's very easy floating because there's plenty of water. Second day, it's the adventure day because you have a lot of rapids. We have up to class 4 rapids, and you find them in that second day of floating where you need to portage often. The third and fourth days are where the river widens out, kind of a braided river. So now you have to start using your skills to figure out where the water channel is, to keep yourself in a water channel. And it's like a Jeopardy game, making a choice. Is it the right choice or not? You may end up walking your canoe a little ways because of sandbars, but it's still an amazing, and what is very amazing about it now is that you could be the only people out there, your group, and not interact with anybody else. And when we did this in October, we had a beaver come out and swim beside our canoe for a while. We had bald eagles, we had elk, we had antelope, we had deer, you name it, and we had the animals around us. And so it's pretty magical. So in order to become a national scenic river, and only 1% of the rivers in the United States actually have the ability to become designated. They have to have outstandingly remarkable values. So the ones that the Niobrara meets is the fish and wildlife value, the geologic value, our waterfalls, and also in the cliffs on the different edges, you can see the different layers between the sandhill layer, the rosebud, the valentine, and the shale, pure shale. The paleontological value, we sit on some of the largest resources of early mammals from the Pleistocene era. The recreational value, that's obvious. The scenic value is also pretty obvious. Historic value, there's historic uses along this river, and the cultural, where we talk about who's cared for the river in the past and how it's been cared for, from Native Americans to landowners to outfitters to nature conservancies, NRDs, Park Service, Wildlife Service, etc. So some of the things that we find as challenges is that as the National Park Service managing Niobrara National Scenic River, we don't own land. So we are a complete partner park because we manage water in the river, but we don't own the land. And so a lot of what we have to work on is working with our partners and also getting information out to the public on can I just walk on anybody's land and use it as a landing? Can I use any landing that's available? There's a lot of controversy that comes with that, and even managing the scenic river to make sure that we don't degrade it by building a McDonald's on the bank. That's an extreme, but we watch over the zoning with the counties. You also see an example of this is one of, it's an NRD, I put Brewer Bridge in there for you. But it's a landing, it's a part of our partnerships. We don't have land. Part of what our park is charged to do is to provide public landings. So the only way we can do that is with our partners. So we jointly work on projects where we find funding between the two of us to create landings like this one, where you have a beautiful landing to use to get in and out. There's a picnic area, restrooms, that kind of thing. So that's one of our challenges. One of the things that hit us is people will, I'm just going to talk about the first year of the pandemic. We went from having, and I'm going to jump a slide and come back to this one real quick. Are we being loved to death? Our average in 2001, our visitation on the river was around 39,000 people. The first year of the pandemic, we hit over 102,000. And last year we were at 90,000, but we also think we were missing some counts in there possibly. our July average over about a 10-year period is 35,000 people, pretty much on Saturdays. And we are party central on Saturdays. And that's okay. But how do you manage that with safety, not hurting the resource? So that becomes one of the challenges that we are constantly working on. So I'm going to go back to this one. We were faced, the first year of the pandemic, we started getting calls from outfitters fairly frequently saying, you need to talk to people who are coming here because they're not portaging, they're taking the rapids, we're fishing people out, people are getting hurt because they're trying to do things they shouldn't do. People are where they don't belong, they're trespassing on my land. We were getting calls all the time. We spent that winter trying to mitigate, what are we going to do about this? What can we do about it? So this is a document that we created. We called it the Know Before You Go, because what we learned is that with those 102,000 people, very few of that percentage actually made it to our visitor center to talk with the park ranger to get guidance on where to go, how to do it. Our website shows it, but they're not all finding that. Our outfitters are great with teaching people the safety things. Don't do this, do this. They weren't using that. People were coming with their own equipment. So we started figuring out we need to find them where they are in the community and just give them the basics of what they need to know. It's private land, public water. How do you respect that? How do you respect these landowners? Don't be trespassing. Trash, take your trash out. If you're using landings, how do you know what's public? How do you know what's not? We also got complaint letters from visitors who were being charged $20 to take out at a spot where they thought it was free. So we decided to go on an education campaign, and it worked because last year we had 0 complaints, so which was fabulous. So I'm going to jump over that one. So one of the other things we did to address the visitation and figuring out, we made that, and this is the Caring for the Niobrara. And we made big posters of those. We took them to every outfitter. We took them to every gas station, the grocery stores, the hotels. And on here, we delineated how long it takes to get where you're trying to go. We highlighted what is a public landing, what's a private landing, and just tried to get all the things that people were complaining about answered within this. So, a lot of our work is making sure people are safe on that river, trying to get enough education out there so people have a great visitor experience. One of our other biggest challenges right now is, and I visited this place with our 3 sons every year for 10, 15 years. I did not know of any of the actual natural resources that were there. All I knew was it was fun to tube on, and we had a great time. And it wasn't until I got there that I started to realize how unique this place is, the resources that it has. And when we have people from all over the world that end up there and all over the US, they tell me, why don't you promote this? Because it is such an amazing place. It's so unique. When we talked about the 6 ecosystems earlier, I didn't mention that we have 6 ecosystems that converge in this valley. They overlap with each other. So you have plants and animals that typically never see each other. They're interbreeding. So we have hybrid plants and animals that you'll find nowhere else in the world than in our Niobrara River Valley. So it's rich with resources. So that's also part of our challenge now is, how do you promote this place, but not promote it too much that we start degrading the experience people are having, or even hurting the resource itself. So from here, I'm going to pass it on to Matt.
Going to go back a slide before I get started on some of mine. Good afternoon, everyone. As you can see there on this map that Susan put up, you notice the Fort Niobrara National Wildlife Refuge just shortly after you go east of Valentine. And for all practical purposes, the access point at the Cornell, right below the Cornell Dam on Fort Niobrara National Wildlife Refuge, is really the first access point for river floating on the national scenic portion of the Niobrara River. And just a little bit of background about Fort Niobrara National Wildlife Refuge. It's a 19,000 acre refuge. It was established in 1912, and the primary purpose, or the establishing purposes for the refuge, was for the conservation of native birds. So the refuge area was previously part of a military installation. When they were looking at decommissioning that military installation at the turn of the century, they were looking for other ways to utilize that land area. And the Audubon Society and other conservation groups were real active at the time. They noticed that sharp-tailed grouse populations, prairie chicken populations, and primarily bobwhite quail in this local area had been decreasing. And they were looking for ways to conserve those species as well as other native birds. And as such, the refuge was established. One of the key points of refuges is the primary purpose is for wildlife and habitats. However, incidental or secondary uses such as river floating, wildlife observation are allowed on national wildlife refuges as long as they don't contradict with those primary purposes of the refuge. And that becomes real important as we move forward. So river recreation, it's kind of interesting to go through the refuge files about when this really started, but kind of in our annual narratives, which are the reports that we put together every year about happenings on the refuge, we started noticing indications that river recreation really started around 1970 with canoe races and kayak races on the river. Then there were, formally in 1974 in that annual narrative, it was stated that there were commercial outfitters on the refuge, and we had about 6,760 visitors utilize the refuge for that recreational floating the river. And, over a 20-year period, a little bit more than a 20-year period, in 1997, it was recorded around 30,000 visits. And so at that point in time in 1997, there were already some questions developing about, is this river recreation, these 30,000 visitors that are going through the refuge? And as Susan noted, they're primarily going through the refuge during those summer months and on weekends. So while sometimes you can go through that area without much disturbance, during that primary breeding time for native birds that would utilize that river corridor for nesting and brood rearing purposes, we had some of the heaviest visitation. So there were questions developing about that time. Is this use really compatible, so to say, with what the purposes for which the refuge was established? And some key things happened in 1997. In 1997, Congress passed a law that basically updated the Organic Act for the National Wildlife Refuge System. As part of that update, it was stated that refuge uses cannot materially detract from meeting the purposes for which that refuge was established. So all these secondary uses such as hunting and fishing, wildlife observation, floating the river in regards to the Niobrara River and Fort Niobrara, they are permissible, but they can't, impact or negatively impact what the purposes of that refuge are. The other key part of that 1997 legislation is that it required each refuge to create a comprehensive conservation plan, which evaluates what your purposes are, how you're going to implement those purposes, as well as what uses you can facilitate on that refuge. And so in 1999, Fort Niobrara, they worked through the planning process and put forth their comprehensive conservation plan. As part of that comprehensive conservation plan, they also identified they really needed to do a river management plan. So step down exactly how we're going to manage river uses on the refuge and how we're going to ensure that those uses can continue without detrimentally impacting our native birds for which the refuge was established. And so the river recreation plan was passed in 2005. And one of the key things in the river recreation plan, there's a number of key points, but it limited the number of visits to 20,300. And as I showed earlier, that high water mark was around 30,000, and about 90% of probably the launches on the Niobrara River occurred at the refuge. So it was a real important launch site, not only for the river users, but also the community, because the city of Valentine, river outfitters were strongly dependent upon that use at Fort Niobrara National Wildlife Refuge for really kicking off their customers that they were trying to provide this experience for. So the number 20,300, that was kind of developed over a period of several years. There were a number of studies done on the refuge looking at, and what they did was they simulated disturbance on the refuge. They looked at how did various species of birds react when a tube would float down the river, when a canoe would go down the river, or when they would, raise up the noise levels. So they looked at disturbance and noticed that some birds outright flushed. They didn't return to the river while this activity was going on. Some birds would jump away from the side of the river, but they would quickly come back to the location and resume normal activities during, soon after the users went through or the floats went through. But they came up with this number of around 20,300, that's kind of the threshold. Below that number, it seemed that the native birds would still utilize the river. You could still get reproduction along the river corridor. Above that use on the refuge, they determined that there probably was going to be some detrimental impacts to nesting birds, which would be counter to the purposes for which the refuge was established. So what was the overall impact of the river recreation plan and implementing it? Well, I showed earlier that we had about 30,000 visits on the launch area and through the refuge prior to the river plan. By 2007, we were already down to 10,000 launches on there. And that's primarily due to a number of items that really altered our user groups. There were a couple of rules we implemented on the refuge to kind of, one, make sure we had a good experience for our visitors to the refuge. There was a lot of crazy stuff going on the refuge. Prior to the river recreation plan, that top photo and middle photo with the tubes, you'd see a lot of that even within the refuge portion of the river. We put limitations on the type of vessels that could be launched on the refuge, limitations on tying vessels together, and probably one of the most important things is alcohol use was no longer allowed on the refuge. And that had some real consternation for a lot of users as well as the outfitters, because there's a lot of people that float the river, and I'm guilty as charged. You enjoy having a beverage as you're going down the river. It's a nice, relaxing float. But the refuge at the time and moving forward, really looking to change that demographic that was coming through, most importantly, to reduce the number of people using the refuge to ensure that we still met those native bird purposes for the refuge, but also to make sure that we had a wholesome environment for families and others floating down the river, and really getting to the key use that we were trying to promote is wildlife observation. And so now when you go down the refuge portion of the river, you'll see a lot more of the canoes and kayaks, much more so than you will floats. And we definitely have a different user group on the refuge. You're less likely to see college students on our portion of the refuge and more likely to see families moving through the Fort Niobrara portion of the refuge. But like I said, that wasn't without impacts and consternation within the community. This was a big change for outfitters that had built up an industry really floating the river and a livelihood part-time, at least part of the year, for the commercial activities on the river, as well as the community. So there was a lot of consternation that came with that. And Mike has a lot of history on that. So I'll turn it over to Mike to kind of discuss a little bit more about some of the consternation that occurred with the river recreation plan changes.
Thanks, Matt. Good afternoon. My name is Mike Murphy. Been fortunate enough to be the general manager here at the mill in Niobrara, like Crystal said, for 20 years now, and was at Lower Niobrara for a little over a year, and then was in Bassett with Game Parks for almost 2 years. So been here and been able to work with the landowners and individuals and the river and management of it, for over 20 years. And I've, it's one of those places that if you haven't been there, you need to come and visit. The one thing about the Niobrara River is unlike the Platte and the Republican that rely on snow melt and snowpack in the mountains, the Niobrara relies on the Ogallala Aquifer for its inflows. Its water comes from, 95% or greater of the water in the river comes from our groundwater. The Niobrara River starts out by Lusk, Wyoming, and traverses across the northern part of the state and dumps into the Missouri River down by the town of Niobrara. With that, it really is unique. At the state line, you can jump across it. You get south of Gordon, Nebraska, and there's a small irrigation district that operates on it. There, southwest of Valentine, you have the largest tributary to the Niobrara River with the Snake River dumping in 1965. Merritt Reservoir, a Bureau Reclamation project, was installed that provides surface water over to northern Brown County, north of Ainsworth, that irrigates about 34,000 acres. And that was probably one of the significant changes in time as far as river flows and water that was diverted during the summer times for irrigation purposes. Then you get into the portion just east of the Valentine at Fort Niobrara and east, in what's now called the Wild and Scenic River portion, which was nationally dedicated in 1991. That's the portion that the Park Service and the Fish and Wildlife have talked about and manage and stuff today. And we've seen, a lot of those changes in use, numbers. Safety has been a big thing that I've seen change. Beautification. Before, when I started, literally Brewer Bridge area down on the river was the only public area throughout that whole middle portion that you could stop and get out and have a garbage dumpster and a bathroom and stuff. So working over the years, the Park Service and stuff is helped put some other public facilities up and down the river. And that's really been key for that upper portion of that scenic river stretch. As you move downstream, there was a lot of recreation that just took place by locals in the river at a lot of the bridge crossings and on public or on private property. And then as you got farther downstream, north of O'Neill, south of Spencer, Nebraska, you had the Spencer Hydro Dam up until 2018 when the floods took that out and stuff. So there was actual hydropower and electricity generated off the river. Below that, continued to flow down through, like I said, the town of Niobrara and then dump back in. So fishing opportunities, wildlife opportunities, right there at Valentine, you bring 7 different unique, ecosystems come together, and it becomes a very unique, diverse river that's utilized for a lot of special and special purposes, which has also brought some challenges and associated with that. And a lot of it, like Matt started to touch on, when you start telling private landowners how to manage their property or who can use the river and where you can use it to not. Alcohol, that discussion about restricting alcohol was a big change, a big demographic change from those putting in at Cornell Bridge Dam launch location, right east of Valentine, to downstream on private property. Changes, that was probably one of the biggest demographic changes of use of the river. But with that came improvements, landowners working on improving their access, putting in the river and out of the river. And that's where, the Park Service, has been involved in working with that, including recycling and more, garbage dumpster type facilities for the trash. The Niobrara Council's been key in a lot of those activities to promote, yearly cleanup days and yeah, just a lot of it's been educational, and there's always that threat, of coming to the river and being in violation of something, but by and large, everybody's there to help, assist, and enjoy the river. And that's what it is. It's a working person's river from west to east that still gets used for farming, ranching, recreation, that we all get to come see and enjoy. And I think that's what makes it special. It's not a place that you go and just see and you wonder what used to take place there. And we're all able to use it. We're all able to continue to enjoy it. And I think that's the goal of a lot of all the local people is, you know, that long-term sustainability and management of the river. So with that, I'm gonna turn things back over to Crystal.
To the chat. While you guys are thinking about some questions, I'll kick it off with, I know it's not right in the wheelhouse for any of you, but what have you seen for economic impacts for the local community, their Valentine and the private landowners?
If you look at our, there it is. If you look at our community and you see all the hotels, fast food restaurants, boutique shops, that's because we're a visitor hub. And it's because of the river that people are coming there to do that. So you can see, and the outfitters have also grown in the complexity of what they offer and what they're doing. And so that has also brought more economic development to the area.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been a benefit to all them, you know, them communities, whether it's Ainsworth, Springview, Bassett,
Right, yeah.
Valentine. You know, I would say with that shift of the demographic, you know, there's some people that maybe don't make it all the way into Valentine now that probably stop on the way, you know, but I mean, that could be mean stopping in Norfolk or Grand Island to pick up their supplies before they get to the river also.
And over the pandemic, we were really noticing a lot of people never made it to Valentine because they got to Long Pine or Springview, and that's as far east or west as they got.
Other questions?
So picking up on the economic development side of things is, I know the Scenic River Declaration is to manage development or to keep it scenic, but is there pressure to, I don't know, I've always heard of people going up there and like Airbnb type things, and really now is that a long-term, now with COVID, people saying, hey, you know, I'm just gonna move and be there for longer term? I mean, is the like internet and all that kind of thing there so people can do that? And then that begs the need for a whole additional infrastructure and a lot more ripple effect of changes to the whole community outside the summertime kind of recreational season, but actually good because then you did get other bird watching and all that is a year-round thing. So
There's more to
what
the
other
river
impacts?
than just the floating season. There are so many things to do around it. I know of two couples that moved into Valentine in the last year for the sole purpose of they thought it was a nice place, targeted to come move to, and they telework. And we're seeing that, and from what I'm hearing from some of the landowners, a friend of mine has a ranch house right on the edge of town. They get calls from people from all over the United States that are in the area visiting. They call back, find out who owns it, and would you sell it to us? There's a lot of that happening right now. So yeah, we've been busy, and it does create new opportunities. And we have new opportunities for the smaller towns that are east of Valentine to create different excursions on the river that we don't have now. I know of one person who's starting a guiding service. We don't have any guiding services now, but there will be one this coming summer. There is now, we've gotten questions for people wanting to know, where do I rent a tent and sleeping bags? I don't want to haul it here with me. I want to go rent it. Or would you actually put my camp up and then move it downstream for me or downriver for me? So there's a lot of variety of opportunity economically that can happen. And then that provides a better living for those of us that live in the communities too.
Yeah, I think I've definitely seen some of those changes. You know, we're starting to see a few of the property owners down along the river add, you know, electrical hookups, the changes in cellular service and like I said, some of it just comes back to safety. You know, after 20+ years, the main river road from Sparks down to the river was finally completed. You know, that was something that was put back in the Nebraska when Senator Ben Nelson was available and stuff. So that finally got completed. Of course, 20 years went by and the amount went up and the amount of pavement decreased, but otherwise it's still rural. You know, it's still gravel roads and lack of cell phone service and stuff like that, which isn't all bad either. So it's part of it, but on the flip side, we you know, we do see those improvements. You know, I mean, from in season long, whether it's the bird watching, the hunting, the just the recreation or the ranch life, you know, that ranching life in the Sandhills is highly coveted, and you know, over 100 years, you know, a lot of them are family generational ranches and stuff, and that's what's made the Sandhills what it is today. Is you know, that long-term sustainability and management of its grasses and ecosystem, and then you throw in the Niobrara River forest that's there, and after the 2012 fires, that's the largest remaining intact forest in the state of Nebraska. So we're all working to, you know, keep and maintain all that stuff viable, healthy, for all uses and benefits.
You asked about internet service. We have Outlaw in Valentine, but I'm not sure who it was. It may not have been Outlaw, but they just ran high-speed fiber all along the river road to all the outfitters areas. So they will now have internet down along the river too. Although some people come just to get away from that.
Now it's your choice whether you get away. A question from online. Jessica Corman says, great to hear about the river. I've been studying the aquatic ecology for the past couple of years. I will contact you offline about that. But what are your thoughts on water quality issues, if any, that you've seen in the river?
Well, we do constant monitoring of it, and the water quality is very clean. We do watch for anything coming in from the tributaries that come into the river. We're watching. So as soon as we see a change in quality, we're going to go find out why. So look for that. We're always watchful. You want to add, you guys do water quality too.
I was just middle of Niobrara, and our staff have worked with formerly known as Department of Environmental Quality, now Department of Environment and Energy. I think I got that correct. And so yeah, we do each summer do sampling mainly down at the Sparks gauging station on the river, but then other points upstream, downstream, and its tributaries. And then on a 5-year rotational basis, it's a full-blown basin rotation where we're, you know, collecting samples every week and looking at and analyzing, you know, from pesticides and metals and the whole gamut of aspects of water quality. And I mean, we're lucky. The Sandhills are both our groundwater and our surface water are very good. But one thing with the Sandhills is our streams are naturally bedload sediment streams. So we move a lot of sand, which is the same sand that ends up working its way down to, you know, the Missouri River, and then fills in there above Yankton at the Gavin's Point Dam there. And so yeah, but that comes back to working with the private landowners and management of those pastures and grasses, and then you throw in a year like 2012 where it's hot and dry and things maybe get a little overgrazed, or then you get a big rain or hailstorm and that moves a lot of sand. But at the end of the day, yeah, we are blessed with very good water quality in north central Nebraska.
Other questions? All right.
Hi. Apologies if you touched on this already, but with the limitations that you put in place for the usage, did you see any big pushback on it, or was there kind of an overall understanding of the importance of the limitation?
I wasn't around at the time, but I think there was a pretty big pushback at the time, up to and including litigation in federal court against the Fish and Wildlife Service. So it was not met, you know, with open arms by probably the community, the public, or the outfitters. But the Fish and Wildlife Service, they went through the process, assessed it, evaluated it and ultimately made the decision that that's what needed to be done to ensure that refuge purposes and that focus on native birds was maintained.
All right, and as I'm walking back, I got one question that's more just for fun. Of the hybrid and unique species, what's your favorite? I'm intrigued to hear more, but just pick one.
I'm going to go with the Smith aspen. We have aspen trees. People are so surprised to find aspen trees there. They're a relic of the Ice Age. And so it's a cross of those. And actually right now they're in danger because the microclimate from a 2005 and a 2009 studies show that they are declining due to their microclimate warming up. But also other thing that's really infringing on them is cedars. The cedars are crowding out and taking the resources too.
Well, this time of year, I'd have to go with a sharp-tailed grouse, prairie chicken hybrid. It's not really unique to the Niobrara by any means, but seeing them on the Lex this time of year and not sure if they're supposed to spin or bounce is quite the scene.
You know, I think the whole thing is what makes it unique. It's all those ecosystems, that short and tall grass, the northern boreal forest, the pine ridge forest coming in, the aquatic riverine systems. I mean that's what really makes it diverse there in Valentine, and then that expands east and west. But 20 years ago I remember my mom coming to town and she's like, is it always brown here? And I think that's what's unique, is you got to be there 365 days a year to see those changes, see the migratory birds come and go, see the eagles and the deer and the elk populations that have grown over the last 20 years, and that it's all working with farming and ranching. That's there. Those private landowners have been there, and they're stewards, they're caretakers of that land, and that's why we have the unique and one of the greatest river systems in the state of Nebraska.
Could you just give a brief history on why this stretch of the river is a national scenic river? And yeah, I know it's a long story, but also, how do you keep the river wild when you have so many different types of uses on the river?
Sorry, want me to? Well, I'm not the expert there. Again, none of us were around when it was declared, but you got to go back pre-1991. There was a fair amount of increased use that was coming to the river. Then there was a proposed dam that was going to be put down at Norden, and there was some sediment to avoid and stop that dam from being put in, which was successful. That project ended up moving to the Calamus River, and the Calamus Reservoir was installed because of the Norden Dam. That dam at Norden was supposed to irrigate water, take water over to northern Holt County over by O'Neill, irrigate property over there. And then, so yeah, that went through a lot of federal process, litigation. To be honest with you, actually the Park Service opposed the original designation. I don't know if you guys knew that or not, but they did. And at the end of the day, it was declared a wild and scenic river. There was actually the portion, I think there was like a 6 or 7 mile portion that wasn't included in that original designation, right in the middle where the dam would have been there south of Norden. Time went by and that gap was filled in. But it come back to trying to look out and preserve something that a portion of the population felt was significant and it needed to be managed and maintained, and that brought the Park Service to town. They started out with a field office in O'Neill and then transitioned to an office in Valentine, and now it's a whole interpretive complex and stuff. The Fish and Wildlife has been there, well, back to the Fort days, 1912, I believe, Matt. So, you know, that's been a huge, you know, history of Valentine and the history of the surrounding area with the troops and moving forward. But at the end of the day, it's really that long-term sustainability and balance. And where it's gotten tricky, I think, in at times is when recreation and irrigation and fish and wildlife needs kind of collide. And that's usually like June, July, August. When things, especially like in 2012, when things get hot and dry. But we're blessed with water. The Niobrara River, basically below Box Butte Reservoir there in Sheridan County, is a gaining stream from west to east. You know, we literally at Valentine, I think we average, you know, 550 CFS on average. You know, like today it's probably running 900 CFS, but then by the time it gets down to, you know, the old Spencer Dam, you know, the average flows down there were, you know, 1,200 to 1,400 CFS. And by the time it dumped into the Missouri River, you know, it gained up to, you know, over 2,000 CFS. So that's the unique challenges is as these guys are required to, I guess, maintain or carry out their jurisdictions. And a lot of that's been dictated through lawsuits. I mean, we've had outside interest groups like the American Rivers here years back that declared the Niobrara River one of the most top 10 endangered rivers. I'm not sure how they come up with that, but I guess if we were a top 10 endangered river on the Niobrara, I'm not sure if that meant the Platte was extinct, but anyway, that's what we got declared. So we dealt with that and we worked through that stuff. So I'm going to turn it over to
Yeah,
yeah.
Right, you covered it very well. If the dam had been put in, Smith Falls would be underwater. So, and a lot of the diversity is what really made it that national scenic river. I was working at Homestead National, actually, it's not Homestead National Monument of America anymore because they have a name change, Homestead National Historical Park. At the time that the Park Service was doing the special emphasis study on Niobrara National Scenic River, and my superintendent led the study. So it feels almost like full circle for me to, and I edited everything for him as he was writing. So it's full circle for me to see the special emphasis study to see if this qualifies as a national park to actually working in it. So otherwise Mike covered everything very well.
I mean, yeah, the Niobrara gets a lot of credit. I mean, for least turns and pipe and clovers at first meetings.
Hooping cranes, I've seen them. There's only 500 left in the world and we have them.
You know, downstream with, you know, pallid sturgeon and, you know, there's been a lot of stocking of that below Spencer Dam, trying to get them established. I believe there's been a couple documented upstream of the mouth of Missouri where it dumps in there. But on the flip side, you know, there was reasons that it was good to have the Spencer Dam still there because it provided the stop for upstream movement Asian Park and stuff. So that natural meandering, that transition, you know, a little bit more of, you know, a controlled system, you know, in Western Nebraska, and then when you get to the Valentine, where you can have that you know, knee deep to deeper water to sandbars that is usable to, you know, when you get down east of Meadville, Nebraska, then it becomes very sandy and braided. And that's where you see a lot more, I guess, people just going out and playing in the river and hanging out in the sand than the tubing, canoeing and kayaking and stuff that takes place, you know, closer to Valentine.
And I guess that story also goes back to using your voice. It was citizens that used their voices to save it and protect it. And, you know, that's what we all need to be doing, is saving and protecting the things that we believe in.
Any other questions from the group here? Oh, all right.
Hi, slightly off topic. You mentioned Spencer Dam a couple times. Can you tell us what's going on with that, if you know, Mike?
Basically I guess Nebraska Public Power District is the current owner of that facility, which is no longer there. We, as a group of the NRDs, upper, middle, lower, and upper Elkhorn, along with Game and Parks, have been working in conjunction with them to transfer that water right from a power and industry right to a recreation, fish and wildlife right through a statutory process in the state through the Department of Natural Resources. That process was just recently published for opening up for hearing and comments. How long that process will take, I don't know. But on the flip side, that bigger part of that is working with the Fish and Wildlife and the National Park Service and everybody to look at all those beneficial uses that are associated with the river, the different timing periods and needs for different fish and wildlife and the recreation side of it and the irrigation side of it and trying to find that I guess, yeah, that equilibrium, but I think that's what I've appreciated in my 20 years is the Niobrara River is not broke, so it's not like we have to fix something, but it doesn't mean we can't continue to improve on things. But so that's the long-term benefit is the work to make sure we have that state, control at that local level for that management. So we can make those needed decisions on a yearly basis if needed.
All right. Any other questions? I think we've got time. We could do another one if someone has another question. All right. We've got them here. We should ask lots of questions.
Well, I have two questions. First of all, that's going to be a destination for me. And so what would be your recommendation on a place to contact to plan is the first question. And the second question, Susan, you said that you were tubing or canoeing or kayaking the river in October. Did
Yeah.
you get wet? Were you cold?
I was not cold at all. In fact, I was kind of hot. I had like capri basically on, and yeah, they got a little bit wet, but not really. Overall, we weren't wet at all. We did have to walk our canoes a few times, but we actually just had a great time. And a couple of the people we were with, we kept losing the guys, and we looked, and because we were on the river's over 1,000 feet in that area, and the East River. So we were on one side and the guys were on the other, and they kept stopping to go swimming in little holes they'd find. So no, it was wonderful. We have had staff canoe every month of the year. And it's a winter wonderland because their seeps, part of what fills the river is the seeps coming out of the aquifer off of our cliffs. And so the seeps become like curtains of ice, and it's absolutely gorgeous to see. And even in town, we have a small city park that has a river. It has seeps too, so you can even see the seeps frozen in the city park too. So, oh, and to plan, you can call our park. We do a lot of trip planning with people.
Yeah, I think the easiest is just simply Google Niobrara National Park Service, Fort Niobrara River Outfitters. There's a couple, I think there's 7, 8 outfitters that 12 now, okay.
Right, and they can reach all of them from our website.
And stuff. There is a individual or two that does a little outfitting west of Valentine on some of that western portion of the river. We got local winery, out by Nenzel, we got a microbrewery there in town. Smith Falls State Park, is another place to access and stuff. Camping, cabins, yeah, there's a lot of amenities, I guess, that are available for people to use within that, short distance from Valentine.
Well, I think that's a wonderful place to wrap up for today. Everyone should make their plans to go visit the Niobrara. Let's thank our panel today.